All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey
And
guys.
we have a special guest tonight. He is the man who taught me pretty much everything I know that actually matters. So I'll go ahead and pull him up here. Hello.
Hi.
I asked him to join
That's an
tonight
intro,
because
dude.
well we like fathers around here, so
Yep.
but I asked him to join tonight because, particularly on this topic, he taught me literally all of it. He started when I was probably 14 or 15 with this. And so I've been reading and studying it for at least that long.
It was
And
before that, but okay.
well, the first conversation I remember and really locked on to it was probably when I was 14 or 15. Actually, I have a memory of driving back from the cabin, talking about it on the drive home. So, but yeah, so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some cultural history, which is the other reason why we have another old guy with us. We're going to get some more perspectives, and because look, Nick and we didn't grow up in the 1960s and 70s. We weren't around yet.
We're
So
80s babies.
yes, we are. But the culture, it was a large part of the culture that shaped this moment in time that we sit in, is a direct result of the boomers and the Xers. So yeah. Here I'll okay. And the framework that we're going to be working with tonight is called the Strauss-Howe generational theory. It actually has a whole Wikipedia page. You can see all the complaints about it. But this is what my dad taught me when I was a young man. And you've probably seen some of these before, like the silent generation, the boomers, Gen X, millennial. Homeland will be a new one for everyone. You know them as Gen Z. But for the purposes of tonight, we need to pay attention to the years in this column on the middle here. So silence, there's still a few of them around. Joe Biden, for example, is a silent. He is I think he was actually born in 42 or something like that. So, but still very old. Boom generation. These guys are the bane of your existence. They are the cause of all your an author of all your present day pain, which is why we have two of them with us tonight.
Well, you know what? We have to say, okay, in this chart, boomers go from 43 to 1960. Other people claim boomers go to 64. I was born in 1962.
Oh, okay.
So, well, I've always kind of identified as a boomer. But these dates, the cutoffs between here are not cut and dry. They're debatable, and if you're on the cusp of one to the other, well, you're a transition in any way you want to stretch it, and you're still going to identify a little bit. Like for me, yeah, I'm going to identify a lot with the boomers and a little bit with the Gen Xers that came, a few years younger than me. I have a lot in common with both.
Well, and Nick, I don't know about you, but I have identified some certain traits within me that are very Gen X. So, and as a note, what you were talking about with the dating. Yes, the dates are squishy. Strauss and Howe use a more sociological method, and I actually have a slide that goes through their method that we'll get to. Just a quick slide. But yeah, so that matters more when we talk about millennial and Gen Z, because this theory was promoted in the early 90s, and the marketers got a hold of it and they kind of ran with it. but marketers need shorter generations for a whole lot of reasons, and so they started cutting things up. Go ahead.
A point of detail: the marketers were already using generational stuff, but it was marketing only, and it had they only touched culture where they needed to for marketing, and their dates and cutoffs were marketing related. So the reason I bring that up is sometimes you'll see their stuff and you go, oh, that doesn't match. Well, that's because it wasn't an attempt to be cultural. It was an attempt to who would buy what from what generation.
Well, this actually came up in a discussion I was having on Facebook. They were trying to say, oh, millennials end at 1996 and Gen Z starts in that year. And the example they brought up was, oh, well, if I talk to somebody born after 96 about hand telephones, they don't know what I'm talking about. And I went, yeah, that's a marketing distinction. The marketers needed to separate the generations by people who could understand 1980s, early 90s tech and those who couldn't. And so what most people call Gen Z is actually just really second half of the millennial generation. So the actual Gen Z, as you know it, the very first year, they just graduated high school this year. They will be voting for the very first year of that generation will be voting this year. So that's how young they are.
Yeah, I was just helping one get registered and vote. He just turned 18.
Yeah. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. This is a giant chart that goes all the way back. Yeah, and it goes all the way back to, if you guys can see it, it goes all the way back to the War of the Roses. And all these charts are taken from Neil Howe's book, The Fourth Turning is Here. We've talked about this book before. But he's just trying to map out that this, you can trace this all the way back to 600 years ago.
If you want to read all of their work on it, they wrote a book called Generations, came out in the 90s, and it goes all the way back to this. And it's like, I don't know, 600 pages.
For the real nerds in the room.
Yeah, you'd have to be a real nerd. I qualify. I read it.
I have not. So I was talking about how they push together the different, like how they come up with their different sociological definitions. And you can actually see that this is in Neil Howe's book, and this is a newer chart, I think. But he actually pulled together a bunch of different sort of archetypes from different systems that are used to define generations. And they all kind of fit in this he calls it seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall. And that's his right here. But he has a bunch of different Spranger life type, Kretschmer temperament, Jungian function, right? He pulled from a lot of different people, and but the point here is to say these are not for marketers. These are not for people who are looking, to try and figure out how to sell you something. And we've shown, you guys have seen before the chart of the different, the amount of money that the different generations have. The Federal Reserve does not use the marketing generations. They don't. I don't think they use the Strauss-Howe model. I think they use I think it's actually in the notes. They use a fixed 20-year model. But the average marketing generation of 12 to 14 years doesn't come up in how the Federal Reserve does their work. So when you get to academics, you're going to use something a lot more like this than you are what the marketers use. And finally, I just want to read a little bit of this so that you guys kind of understand the cultural backdrop that we're going to be talking a bit. The chart here describes how the generations move, and I can't make it any bigger, sorry, because the part I wanted was actually in the lower right here. A prophet generation grows up as increasingly indulged post-crisis children, comes of age as the defiant young crusaders during an awakening, cultivates principle as moralistic midlifers, and ages into the detached visionary elders presiding over the next crisis. So if we go back to the first slide, that would be your boomers. And he actually lists them, there's post-war children there, right? Boom. And you can see on this slide here, you can see prophet, there they are, right? Shaman, priest, magician, intuitive feeling, religious in the Spranger life types, dogmatic. So those would be your boomers. So nomad, or what we call Gen X, grows up as an underprotected child during the awakening, comes of age as the alienated young adults of a post-awakening world, mellows into pragmatic midlife leaders during a crisis, and ages into tough post-crisis elders. A hero, so you know these guys as Xers, and he doesn't talk about it here, but Xers, I've probably noticed that they have a lot of nihilism to them. There's a reason for that. They're underprotected. They tend to view the world as it's always all going to fall apart, and they're midlife leaders during the crisis, so their world has always been getting worse for as long as they can remember. So why wouldn't you be nihilistic? And then so a hero generation. You guys probably know these guys as the term the greatest generation. The ones that quote unquote won World War II. So that's the hero archetype. A hero generation grows up as increasingly protected post-awakening children, comes of age as the team-working young achievers during a crisis, demonstrates hubris as confident midlifers, and ages into the engaged, powerful elders presiding over the next awakening. And that dynamic right there is really what we're going to be focusing on today, hero versus prophet. I will read the artist generation, but those are going to be your Zoomers and your silents, and they're not really relevant to the current culture we have today yet. They will be soon. The artist generation grows up as overprotected children during the crisis, comes of age as the sensitive young adults of a post-crisis world. So we haven't had the crisis yet, and they haven't come of age yet in the post-crisis world. Breaks free as indecisive. Go ahead.
No, finish that, and I got a question.
Okay. Breaks free as indecisive midlife leaders. Oh, hi, Joe Biden. During an awakening, and ages into empathic post-awakening elders. Go ahead, Nick.
So, in some ways, this seems like astrology.
Well, okay.
In other ways, it seems like a generalization.
It is a generalization, and
okay.
So one of its major complaints against it is that it appears to be non-falsifiable, and at the time it was written,
astrology,
right? And at the time it was written, that was the primary accusation against it. This was all written and designed in the 90s, and everyone kept saying, "Oh, well, if we make it to 2015, 2016, and nothing bad has happened, then we know these guys were wrong."
Well, that's true for the non-history types, but anybody who wants to look back in history, it proves that pretty well for 400 years.
Well, it's a generalization, but the generations. Now, depending on your vocational training, you're going to have traits from other generations. Like, the engineer mind in me, that's a little bit different than my cultural mind. But I can recognize both, and they're both present.
Well, Dad, you were talking to me once about how, and I think this is mentioned elsewhere in the book, I couldn't find the quote though, about how Neil Howe talks about how in every generation there's kind of the leaders, the followers, and the rebels.
Yeah, he talks about that. But one of the things he stresses even more importantly on this note is the leaders are really important, but he also stresses this is a cultural average. Any individual may be exactly that, a leader, a true believer in it, or a rebel in it. So I've always been the skeptic watching my boomer. They're my elders because I'm a tail end boomer at best, and so I've always watched them. Thought their ideas were foolish, and that's my perspective, sitting at the bottom end of it. But the top end of those folks were, man, they were going to change the world, and so they fit that profit profile most perfectly.
And another thing I would say is I mean, we can't. He does trace this back. And Generations is a tome. It's a hard read, and if you are willing to go back and look at the history, you can see what they're trying to say. But I think we've gotten one of the interesting side notes, particularly about the Xer generation, is that they're allergic to generalizations.
What, more like that? My truth is my thing,
right? You can't generalize about me because I am a unique snowflake.
Sure.
So,
well, yes, but actually, a conversation we had recently about their rejection of history fits into that too.
Ah, yes, we did have that conversation recently.
Another factor in us young boomers. I'm a young boomer. This big glut of people were right before me. So I come and I'm at the tail end. Well, you know what? All the good jobs, the managerial jobs, there was this glut of people, right? Just, a few years older than me, 5, 10, 15 years older. They held all the good positions. So I had to be in waiting for a long time before I got to the stage where I was actually respected and maybe got to experience some of that power. It's not that we're all looking for power, but you know what? Being a tail end boomer or being right after the boomers was not a great place to be when I was a young man.
The millennials feel that only more.
And so, Steve, what you're actually describing there is one of the sources of that Gen X nihilism.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Very true.
That's where us really young boomers can feel some sympathy for Gen X, because we saw that. We saw these really strong prophet leaders. And they essentially demanded that you follow them and would take no counsel or advice, and you would never be their leader.
Okay, what does that look like, though? Particularly as somebody looking up, do you guys have any stories to describe, like what does that look like as a young boomer or early Xer? I don't know. I'm a millennial. I can't.
That looks like well, I have to tell a story to do this.
Go for it.
I am 10 years old in 1969, the height of the prophets, roaring and screaming in the streets, looking at them going, I don't know that I even trust you, and I'm 10, and you're ripping the world to shreds. What's going to be there what's going to be there in 10 years? Well, what actually happened was my generation just buried themselves in disco and punk rock and checked out. So does that make me Gen X? Well, you couldn't. I mean, I agree with Steve. You couldn't get those folks they were pounding the drums. You couldn't tell them nothing, and you couldn't get in their world. And it did feel like that.
Here's another thing that can't be totally dismissed. I grew up in northwestern Minnesota. Even today, I live in Fargo now, which isn't, 30 miles from where I grew up. Anyway, we are behind the times here. when people from the coasts come to this flyover country, they say, whoa, you're like living 20 years in the past. So that affects how we perceive things too. So I didn't experience a lot of the cutting edge 60s culture. I mean, in the high school I grew up in, okay, I graduated from a class of 60. You know what? There was no ethnic diversity. There was no racial tensions. Oh, there was all the bullying and stuff. But you know what? Pretty much, I'd say 90+% were people whose parents and grandparents had lived in the area. We were all the same.
Oh, and everyone knew everyone else's dad.
Yeah.
I grew up in that until it wasn't. I grew up in a suburb of Fort Worth, Texas, and everybody's dad worked at one or two, almost everybody's dad worked at one or two aviation related fields. They worked in the Bell helicopter, in my case, Bell helicopter plant, which was a mile from my house. And all the kids, it was pretty homogeneous until it wasn't. In 7th grade, I was on the first bus of busing in our school district. And that was an interesting adventure. It wasn't bad. But it was a huge change for the kids who were not, shall we say, homogenous. But they were welcomed for the most part by the other 7th graders. Still a huge cultural change for them. And they had their school forcibly closed, their school that they liked, those kids.
Yeah.
But we bounced about 5 miles down a dirt road to go get them into a very
it was so homogeneous in Minnesota. I graduated from university in 1985. Got my first job in Duluth, Minnesota. I could count on one hand the number of Black people in that city at that time. It was still that, that's just the way it was. There wasn't any racism. I mean, they just weren't here. Well, it's way different now. It's, there's a lot of Black people in that city. And so, the cultural, and I'm not talking racism, I'm just saying that the culture you grew up with, I didn't experience a lot of the racial tensions or even understand people from other racial groups until I got much older. And not everybody experienced that, but depending on what area of the country you grew up in, that was common. Now, there is no homogeneous place in the U.S. where you can say you didn't experience that.
And that was certainly true for me growing up. Yes, I was homeschooled. I've said that before, but my parents had me in our state had a program for homeschool kids where you could go get classes that your parents couldn't teach. Like if you wanted to learn foreign languages, or, if mom and dad didn't know math, we had a lot of kids in math classes. And yeah, you got pretty much everything there. That was even in the homeschooling world, that was the normal case. And this is, this is the 90s for me primarily. Yeah, I think we started 92, 93 with that. I think it was 92.
Yeah.
And all throughout my early high school, I left to go to college early, but and at college more of the same. But yeah, so for me the experience was very different growing up. Oh yeah, this is just the way things are. And on that point, actually, if you look at where we are today culturally, the younger generations, they don't see it. And Nick, I don't know about you, but at least in my experience, it was never a problem. Well, actually, I'm going to state it this way. I'm going to use my dad's and Steve's phrasing. It was never a problem until it became a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I was public school, but it was like 90 something plus percent was, white. And we had a mix of the rest, and it really wasn't a problem. You had some people that would say an off comment here and there, but most of the time nobody cared. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes they kind of flock to their own because that was the culture they understood. And they're comfortable with.
Okay.
Sometimes they
You made
didn't.
some
Whatever.
comments, but it was based out of ignorance. You had no idea what other cultures were like. Things were homogeneous. Okay, this is the way it is. Okay, you adjusted to it moving forward. I don't think young people can even imagine what it's like growing up in a place that's actually very homogeneous. I mean, think to World War II. You grew up in Britain, UK. Hey, everybody was British until these Americans came over here, but they were kind of derived from the British. So it was still homogeneous. The Germans, that was all homogeneous. You were in Sweden, they were all Swedes. Norway, all Norwegians. Italy, all Italians. It was all homogeneous. Everybody had the same religion. There was no ethnic diversity. That was normal.
So, Steve, this reminds me of a political campaign ad in Britain during World War II, and the ad was about American GIs, and it said overfed, oversexed, and over here.
Sure.
And so I
got to get my mic in the right place.
And so, but I've been to Europe quite a bit, and I don't think people understand how racist Europe is. They just don't use skin color. They use passport of origin.
Yes.
So, for example, I was flying with Elena once. We flew over there. We were going into Germany. We walk up to the counter together. We're married. She's got all the documents. We've got everything. We both hand them over. He looks at me, says, "What's your purpose?" I state my purpose. He looks me up. Now, chunk, stamps me in. And I start, and he says, and he tells me to move forward. Okay, I'm going to move forward. Behind me, he's giving her the nth degree because she didn't have her U.S. passport yet. Now, you all have seen my wife. She is white as the driven snow. But that is how it works over in Europe. Europe is a different place in that regard. And I don't think we really understand. I don't think we understand the world as well as we think we do here.
Well, as an example of the not racial but ethnic tensions here in the U.S., I remember being in Calumet, Michigan. That's in the UP, up there in the UP, Upper Peninsula, a mining country. They did copper mining. On one block, intersection, there were 3 Catholic churches. On one intersection. French, I don't remember the ethnic groups, but for instance, the French, the Italian, and the German.
Oh, no.
And you know what? When they came over here, they did not intermix. And there were tensions between the groups. And they're all Catholic. But no, you're German, you go to the German Catholic. Well, Eventually, they all became integrated. But again, it wasn't racial at that time, but it sure was ethnic.
Yeah, I don't, Nick, I don't know if anybody from our generation would even recognize that kind of world today. Because I never experienced anything like that, particularly on the ethnic side. Oh, well, the Germans have to go to the German Catholic Church. Like that's different for me. Okay. So, Dad, you actually had a note on another bit of culture, and we were talking about this earlier this year about how music.
Oh, well, how the prophet generation keyed off of music to get their message across to their hero fathers, mostly, to bug off. It was almost painful to watch because the heroes were used to just winning everything. They just, what they said went, but their children forcefully and angrily told them, go away. You guys maybe you did something, we don't care, but we're going to change the world. And they screamed at them for 5 years. They quit screaming them when Richard Nixon stopped the draft, which was instructive. But I looked at them and I call that movement, it was led by 50s radicals, but they were behind the scenes mostly, but lyrics well, my primary one that I use for this example is the Beatles' Imagine. You guys, meaning your parents, the hero generation, got it all wrong. Your religion, your conformity, that is just unbelievably inhuman. We reject that. But our idea is that the human is perfectible, and you just failed to do it. Popularly labeled today progressivism. And they were going to fix the world. And they thought they could do it. They thought they were going to fix the human mind. If you took over the schools and put all the kids in the proper frame and taught them the right stuff, the human was we'd do it in a generation or two.
Yeah.
And the proof is the opposite.
Yes, I agree.
But at the time, they were idealistic. Okay, it was the beatniks in the 50s, what the hippies of the 60s.
Yep.
Free love. There was the LSD, you got to expand your mind, man. And I was a little bit after that. But it was a change the world. We got to love each other. And yeah, that was the mentality.
Well, I didn't learn till much later that mentality went all the way to the belief that the human mind was malleable and that all the world's problems were rooted in poor culture and philosophy and the arrogance of them saying, well, we will fix it.
Oh, who was the evil one that they were protesting against? The man.
Yeah, the man. That's the hero generation. That's their fathers.
The man, the patriarch.
Yeah.
Who's a rebellion against the patriarch? We're not buying that baloney. We're going to do our own thing. We know more than the old man.
So I actually threw the lyrics up for the song. I haven't read these lyrics in a long time because everyone loves the music. Oh, the music speaks to me. And, Dad, you were actually talking about this when we talked about it. The music was really good, and it got you to kind of follow along with the lyrics of the song. But if you read the lyrics without,
it's bad.
Yeah, if you read the lyrics without the music, it's terrifying. And this is what these people
Subversive.
were taking. Ooh, yeah, that's a good word. This is what these people were saying. imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. That's, Dad, what you were talking about with your religion's bad. Of course, imagine there's no countries. This is the one world
Okay,
order.
first one. What comes to mind? Alex Crowley, Do As Thou Wilt. For the first stanza.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, now read the next one.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace.
Multiculturalism.
Yep.
Well, multiculturalism, but atheistic multiculturalism. It's
doesn't work.
Imagine imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world.
Sounds like the World Economic Forum agenda.
Ooh,
the last
no.
push of the silence and the boomers.
No, what's the ism? Come on, guys. What's the ism on this one?
Oh, communism.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
who is running? Okay, I'll look it up. But if I recall correctly, Klaus Schwab is a boomer.
Exactly, because World Economic Forum agenda.
Yeah, he was born in 1938. He's actually a silent old guy. But remember, Joe Biden's a silent too. So, the silents, they're artists.
Soros, I'm guessing. So.
Oh yeah, Soros he's what, 90 something? Yeah, he's an early silent. Well, but actually Soros is an interesting example here, because notice how he's very quiet in the public space. That is actually very silent. I mean, that's how they got the name. They don't operate in the public space. That is what the boomers did. The profit generation. They didn't get these ideas from, they didn't just get them from nowhere. They got them from the silent generation that came right before them. So, yes, people have their complaints about this generational theory, but we keep seeing it crop up in empirical evidence. So I'm going to take this away for now.
I don't need to see it again. I've had it memorized since I was like 12.
Yeah.
Not that I wanted to. It was just you were immersed in it. You couldn't get away from it.
Now, so as we move through history, that Beatles song in mind, it's all about peace and love and sharing everything. But boomers today, particularly, and the millennials in particular will tell you this, boomers today are the most selfish generation that alive. And I actually don't claim to know why and how that worked out. Maybe you older guys could shed some light on that.
Well, they were individually selfish when they were doing this. That's the part that you don't see unless you lived it. I mean, very few of them would live in a commune, and the ones that did failed. It wasn't possible. So they didn't practice this. They just preached it.
Okay. So is some of the later work, particularly the music out of the 70s, is that, and particularly the 80s, is that a frustration at the failure of their ideas?
Well, some of that is you had the culture, that culture of change only lasted maybe 10 years, if that. Okay. And then by the mid 70s, the radicals have moved on to individual actions. They're busy taking over the schools, which they successfully did. they really quit. As I mentioned before, all the big noise quit when Nixon stopped the draft, because that was their actual prime driver for the biggest protests and noise and stuff. But when they got around the campfire and sat around, they talked philosophy, and they essentially ended up with Imagine. They kept coming back to it over and over. Now the different peoples would approach it either softer or stronger. But in music, by the time you hit the mid 70s, all of that idealism in the music is gone. There's bands still playing their old stuff, but there's nothing new coming out. I mean, you get disco, you get the Bee Gees by 75. And there's nobody writing Imagine anymore. That's
Yeah, and
interesting.
Bob Dylan had fallen in popularity by that time.
Yeah. The Dylans, the Billy Joel and his stuff. We Didn't Light the Fire, another song I could have brought up. Also really disagreed with, and even as a kid, I was like, I don't like that. Blaming the generation before you again, and then claiming that you had the arrogance and smarts to fix it.
Oh, okay. I'm going to bring up something here.
Selfishness. That I'm tying this back to the, you're saying that the boomers were selfish. Absolutely. But it was rooted in their arrogance. They actually thought they could fix the human mind and turn it from a sinful mess into a lollipops and butterflies. They believed that.
And this is why they started focusing on the schools so much, right?
Yeah, but they had figured out that they were going to get older and they needed jobs. And so if they were going to, and you can go back and find some of this in their writing, it doesn't show up that much. It was sort of a collective verbal discussion that said, we're all going to stay in school and get, 3 doctorates, but then we're going to own the schools. We're going to become the profs, and we're going to teach this philosophy that we believe is going to fix the human mind. They're the ones that started all the sociology and psychology. Those were minor departments in universities until they took over, and they exploded them because they thought that was the way to fix the human mind.
Studying liberal arts and a liberal arts education before what Fred's mentioned here, the explosion of sociology and psychology. Liberal arts was a good education. It was well-rounded. They taught you philosophy. You learned a lot about history. It made you into a well-rounded, well-informed person who knew a lot about the world, and then you could go in and apply it. No, they didn't teach you application for your education. They just kind of tried to impart some wisdom. Well, it became specific or career specific in this time when the soft sciences took on a greater greater role. I don't know what the right word for that is.
Yeah, I don't know what the right word is either, because again, my experience was it's always been this way. If you have this highly fractalized college experience where if you're going to be an engineer, you're going to spend all your time in this part of campus. Like even on my little campus where I was going, there are entire buildings that I don't even know what the inside looked like. But I knew where all the offices were and where all the computer labs were in both of the computer science buildings. Like by the end of it, I read the room number and off I'd go, right? But I spent most of my time in about 3 buildings out of 10 on campus.
Well, I spent my time at the University of Washington dreading having to go up to upper campus because it was literally split. It was geographically split. All the sciences are down in the south end, and to do distribution requirements, I had to drag myself up the hill to the north end. And all those classes I took up there, I was like, I'm just surviving. I don't want to be anywhere near. And that's the mid 80s.
So what you're
Yeah,
saying
I
is they
kind of
took
had the
over
same
quick.
thing. University of Minnesota, same thing. You had the West Bank and the East Bank, okay, because they were across the river from each other.
That's even more.
That's
like
you'd
Paris.
go to the West Bank for all the business, and I don't know, you had a few classes over there, but engineering, that's one of the old classic training. So you were on the East Bank. That was the tradition. That was the original site. So there was divisions that way. And yeah, there were a lot of buildings that I never went into.
All right. So
Yeah.
we're kind of what? Go ahead.
No, that's kind of how it was when I went to Texas Tech. So there's probably 3 or 4 buildings. I remember I had the path. It's kind of like a diagonal line that connected all the buildings. It was always in this one path. And so, and they had all this whole other side of campus that I never even went to. So, well, except to pick up the girlfriend at the time. She was over there. So,
well, now you wouldn't because she'd be screeching. But okay, so we're kind of moving up into the 80s here, and now to be fair, we don't really have an Xer in the building in the chat. But Xers actually had a pretty significant impact on culture too, and I would call it. So if we go back to the generational cycle that we talked about, if the prophets they're the awakening, and as my dad said, they started destroying everything. And so the Xers are kind of living in this world where things still function, but they don't function properly. And they know it. But I don't know, is it like they feel like they can't do anything about it because or do they feel like, or is their nihilism sort of more because Dad, you were talking earlier about, the boomers are trying to do all these great things, but they were selfish about it for themselves. The Xers have the same selfishness, but they have none of the idealism about it.
They are everybody. You can always always an element and a track of rebellion against your elders. So you take the hyper idealistic prophets who are very controlling. They've got a plan and they're going to control the class syllabus, and you're not really allowed to dissent. That's where I found myself as a looking up at them going, dissent here is not allowed. And they did that to their fathers, and they did that to the people who followed them. So you get this rebellion, but you also get a nihilism that comes from, well, you guys said you were going to perfect the human mind, but you didn't do it. That was the generation they were going to fix. So you have that resentment and this obviously unwillingness to be heard by that your parents. And they handed you a key to the house, the latch key, but they're out fixing somebody else's kids, but you've been ditched. Is that a good enough description of it?
Yeah, it is. And that was an interesting observation that this generation was that the boomers were so focused on fixing everyone that they kind of, as he described in the final slide there, they kind of ignored their own kids.
Boomers kind of had life easy because up through the 60s and 70s, the economy was doing pretty well. Yeah, we had our ups and downs, but the U.S. was the powerhouse. We had the big corporations. We had all the knowledge. You could get a job. I graduated in 85. It was kind of tough to find a job in engineering. I was lucky enough that I got one. But remember, the stock market hit its low in what was it, 82, something like that. And then we had this surge. That's kind of when Microsoft started, around that time. And I remember when Intel and the chips were coming out and this new thing, and this is going to be great. The U.S. is going to design these chips, and we're going to build the chips here. Intel is going to be phenomenal. And Nope.
Nope.
It was started in the 80s, and progressively they outsourced all our manufacturing. And I did that show on the shoes.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. shoemakers, they were going down in the 80s because they started to export it. And by the early 90s, most of our shoemaking industry was now overseas. And okay, that I'm just using that as an example of all the jobs, all the expertise, all these old-fashioned industries that started leaving. So it was tough being a late boomer or early Xer in the 80s, figuring out, okay, they just pulled the rug out from under us. But of course, you didn't see it at that time.
Well, so as a little bit of a side note, Intel is required by national security law to keep some fabs in the United States, and they do, and they're actually really mad right now because the federal government's reneging on a payment. But for a fab they just built. But in general, Steve is absolutely right, and that is interesting because there was the stock market crash of October '87, but we actually recovered really quickly from that.
But that was 87. It hit
Yes.
its low in 83, and there was a boom from 82 to 87. We thought we were flying.
The early
I remember
80s,
the oil market crashed in '88.
yeah. But the
That's
early
the year I was
80s
born. recession
recession was almost deliberate. The Reagan administration inherited a really weak, relatively weak economy from the Carter administration, and they told us, "Hey, we are going to fix it, but it's got to get worse before it gets better." And it was 2 or 3 years, 81, 2, 3, of now this isn't going real great. Economic growth is slow. They raised the interest rates sky high to clear out debt, and it did. It worked. And then the Hunt brothers did their little silver finagle. I was tangentially involved in that because my dad was in the photographic business by then. So we were recovering silver out of photographic negatives and selling it at outrageous rates. It was kind of silly, but that only lasted a year. But that was a collusion thing. But yeah, the early 80s economic thing was deliberate, and it worked. And everybody knew what they were doing, which was not true in the 80s. It was just haphazard.
In retrospect, that period where from the 70s, the engineers were in charge. The industry, the production was in charge. And then we hit this transition. And when the stock market boomed up into 87, that was the beginning of the financialization.
Yes, sir.
And the exporting of all the expertise and the making, being a productive. Our economy is based on production. That transition happened in the 80s. Beginning of the 80s, we're still based on production. By the end of the 80s, our wealth is based on financialization. That was a huge transition. And we kind of only in retrospect can we realize what an impact that had on our lives, on our attitudes.
Well, and this is actually a huge point that I want to touch on, because one of the problems that we keep talking about is, well, but there's no jobs. Well, it kind of depends on what you're doing and where you are. If you're designing things like, say, chips, high-end CPUs, the kind that sit in every computer that you guys are using, are designed right here. Well, they're actually designed in Oregon. And it's the Intel has an engineering campus down in Pendleton, Oregon, I believe. And then AMD has a campus down in Silicon Valley somewhere. AMD has no fabs. They go to a company called TSMC in Taiwan, and they do all the fab work. So AMD needs a bunch of high-priced engineers, and very high-priced engineers for the kind of work they're doing, but they don't need a production staff. They outsource that. Intel outsources some. In fact, I just read an article today about or yesterday morning about how the TSMC is building some Intel designs right now. So not all, but some. And what happens when we do that is all of a sudden there's entire, for lack of a better term, classes of people who can't get jobs. I mean, how many people do you know fit the bill for high-priced CPU engineer? I can't even do that. So, what's your average?
That's a 0.0 something percent of the population.
Right, exactly. and the IQs required are, 130, 140 to do this. Well, that's just that doesn't, for a lot of the population, that economy doesn't work. And I think that's where you start to see because in the 90s we had a fairly stable economy, but as Steve said, that economy was based on financialization, specifically of the move overseas. So they were able to leverage the cheap debt that Greenspan allowed to happen to build overseas fabs. I mean, Apple's entire production line was built during this period. Their Chinese production line was built during this period. And at the time, Chinese labor was cheap. It's not now. It's actually twice as expensive as Mexican labor, which is wild when you think about it. That's a whole nother show that we could do. But the point is that the average person in the United States no longer goes to high school and can get a job.
Well, let's bring this down to something that people can actually relate to. In the 80s and 90s, you went to buy a washing machine. It was made in the U.S. Whirlpool, General Electric, Kenmore. Yeah. I mean, try and find a washing machine made someplace else. Now, you go to your local Home Depot. I challenge you to find a washing machine made in the U.S.
And they make it all this eco part so it breaks down and doesn't even last. Thank you, government.
Well, yeah, you could have a washing machine that lasted you 20 years. Parts didn't change much. They were all available. None of this plastic crap. It didn't break much. If it broke, you could get it fixed. Now, 10 years later, we discontinued that model. We can't get parts for that. You're going to have to buy a new one. It's not based on the quality of production or the pride in the longevity of a product. It's a financial product. It's kind of a gee whiz product. Yeah, it works good, but it has planned obsolescence.
Yeah, Tacticus, you're right. You can't find 100% American-made furniture either. That is good luck. I mean, you might find stuff that was assembled here. That might be the best you get. Yeah, Dad, you're muted. Dad, you're muted. He can't hear me.
Fred, you're muted.
I'm muted again. Yeah, that story, the furniture story, devastated the Carolinas because that was the hub of furniture manufacturing, and they just wiped it out. Absolutely wiped it out in the 1980s. Offshored it all.
Oh, we lost.
And every region has a story like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, Detroit and the automotive.
Yep.
Let's see. What are the other ones we can think of? I know there was stuff down in Texas. I don't remember what it was.
The South was less affected. The South, because the South has its own culture, and it's sort of I don't know that much of that left, but the rebel culture was still there. We do our own stuff. I could probably find you the lyrics to a song in the 70s about the oil crisis. It was like, drive 75 and freeze them alive, freeze the Yankees. It was very independent culture. I thought Steve would get a kick out of that. You probably never heard it. That was about 1978.
I haven't. No.
I mean, I grew up with rebel flags on the back of pickup trucks. And I knew where the Klansmen lived in our neighborhood in the 60s. That was all muted down by the mid 70s, but it was a 60s thing. But that culture did its own thing, and it looked at it and said, well, Dallas Fort Worth, they built aircraft. All kinds, helicopters, airplanes.
Okay, that's defense industry. They're
Yeah.
not
Well, it
going
was
to let
also the
that go.
result of having the Speaker of the House be from that area for like 2 decades. That was still it didn't hurt.
Yeah. Okay, so so we're moving through the 80s and 90s, and so in the 90s, the millennials are going to school. They're still not in the culture yet. The Xers, they're just now starting to find jobs, really, is what's going on here. The bulk of the Xer generations. I mean, Steve, you're 85 and you're early Xer, late boomer. So, you found a job in 85, so that means that if you look at the length of generation, you've got about from, we'll call it 80 to 2000, where the Xers are the ones that are really kind of in charge and of the sort of day-to-day work. What I find interesting, though, is that the Xers never really they rebelled against it, but they adopted more of an attitude of, well, and this might be, now that you say it, Dad, that because the boomers were so rigid and just said, no, you can't challenge us, we're doing the right thing for the world. I wonder if that's really the source of the Xer nihilism, because they love to be able to speak back to the elder generation and say, guys, this isn't working, but they're told that they're and that they're wrong. And so they just feel like, well, there's just nothing we can do about this. So every man for himself.
They didn't have the numbers to make a dent in the boomers. All the positions and decent jobs and senior people were boomers with years to go for retirement. It was difficult for upward mobility or to gain a position of power or even be heard. I mean, it was kind of like, well, guess I better just plod along because there's not a damn thing I can do.
So
I got tired of business consultants because they were the same way. They were all elder boomers, and they would tell you what you should do, but man, would they listen to you? Or any feedback? No feedback allowed. We're the experts. The first business consultant that I actually hired and will listen to is an Xer, not a boomer.
Oh, interesting.
He's younger than me.
So Xers kind of have this nihilistic view of the world that it was bad when they got into it. It's only gotten worse. And we've gone over the data in other streams. You guys can go back and watch those. It has objectively gotten worse. And I think that if we get up to the millennial generation now, we're starting to see the rebellion. Although it's unfocused right now would be how I would describe it. Like the millennials aren't old enough and aware enough of what's going on to really understand.
We're trying to help.
Well, yeah, but we don't know what's, we know something is wrong, but we don't know what.
That's why we're here, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, yes, Nick, that's why we're here, particularly today, with a couple of older gentlemen who were around when this stuff was being torn down, and particularly in these guys' case, looking up, going, yeah, this is bad. Because we need to, and okay, bury the lead a little bit here. As I mentioned when we started, I've grown up with this stuff since I was a teenager. So in some sense, I've had my life directed at, okay, these are the actual problems. But I think a lot of millennials don't know that. And I speaking from experience in my own generation, they feel very betrayed. That's how I describe the boomer or the millennial generation right now. They feel betrayed.
Especially the men.
Yes.
Especially the men.
Well, because and we've done lots of streams on that topic, so we don't need to get too deep into it here. But yes, especially the men, they feel betrayed. I have a meme that you mentioned Aaron Clary. This is actually a post from him, so I'm gonna pull this up here. This is how boomers feel, or this is how millennials feel about boomers. It says, if I had 2 bullets and was faced with an enemy and a traitor, I would turn around and shoot my grandchild twice. Boomers. and the Xers feel this way too. What I think the difference between the generations is exactly what Neil House said. He said the millennials they are group. They I forget the exact language he used, but they are. Here, I'll pull that up there. Teamworking young achievers. They because at the end of the day, because the millennials have the ability to look up at the Xers and go, yeah, but your selfish nihilism didn't do you any good either. And all that's left is for millennials to come together and say, well, we've got to do something. And I think this is where particularly the millennial fascination with things like social networks comes in. Again, unfocused and not correctly focused, but the millennial affinity for social networks, I think, is a key aspect of their generation that you can see now. Go ahead.
I'll comment there. I got something to say there. So a lot of the churches are still run by silent generation is pretty much like elder emeritus or retired leaders.
Yes.
The current leaders of churches is boomers and some Generation X. There's some millennials. What happens is the millennials see the bull crap. Those that know, they speak up. They get kicked out. They get ostracized. But we're all connected. Social networks. And we know the play that's being done on us, and you can't stop us. Good luck.
Well, it kind of sounds like you're talking about, for lack of a better term, the Twitter effect, or as it's now called, the X effect, where I was reading a tweet this morning. Somebody was talking about because Dad, you were talking about, the boomers want control of everything. And we see that in the modern politics. Yay, censorship, great. Yay, high taxes. Yay, government regulation. Yay, let's kill the guy who has a pet squirrel, or kill the pet squirrel, right?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have the right paperwork.
The boomers are true to form. Things change, but their base philosophy is the one they started with. Whatever we think this decade, doesn't matter what we think this decade, we're right. And there's no telling us anything else. Don't even try. We have all your answers. And that's what they started with. So it's not like they've changed their stripes. They've changed their
Let me bridge this and bring it right back to the red pill. The young men are networking and saying, oh man, this whole marriage thing, it sucks. Yeah, they still have the desire to find a good woman and have kids, but they know, okay, this marriage thing, this divorce racket, a recipe for disaster. I'm not signing up. And it's a groundswell movement. So what are the boomers in the churches trying to do about it? Oh, you need to man up and marry these women. Control these young men to make them do what we think they should do. But the young men are saying, no, I'm not having any part of that. So, I mean, we're seeing it play out. Who's going to win?
Well, statistically, the boomers are dying. We've covered that extensively in prior streams, and it's hard to win when you're dying. However, the boomers, as you said, the boomers are a massive generation with a long tail, and they control the institutions. They do. From top to bottom, Dad, you were saying, oh yeah, they went into schools, and we talked about that a little bit. They own the schools. Well, that's a key component of it. And my dad and I have been talking offline about this marriage situation and why we were talking about why economics won't solve the marriage crisis, because a lot of countries are trying it. Oh, well, if we just give tax breaks and you'll hear the exact same rhetoric here in the United States. I think it was Nancy Pelosi was talking about, or one of the Democrats was talking about, yeah, we need to do tax breaks for the people to solve this marriage crisis problem and this birth rate problem. And, so tax breaks for having kids. And they're not willing to address the actual problem because, as my dad was saying, they've already decided what the right answers are.
Yeah, they do that with everything. That's my lived experience. It's ingrained into me. My elders, who are 10 years older than me, are know-it-alls, and you can't say nothing to them. I mean, I went my own way because of that. It's like I'm starting my own business and doing my own thing. I'm not going to put myself underneath one of those.
Smart man, in my opinion, but I am biased. Oh, excuse me.
I think my dad did about the same thing. So
yeah, I mean,
that's why he didn't want to work for anybody. He wanted to.
My last months in engineering school, I was getting all this pressure to go continue on. I did not. But if I'd have listened to those guys, I would have been an engineer at Boeing, and I probably wouldn't have lasted because I don't have the patience for it. And I was already, even then, deeply ingrained with the boomer bossiness, if you want to put a slogan on it, a meme on it. And I just didn't want any part of that.
Well, I mean, go ahead, Steve.
I did the opposite of Fred. I got a job there. Worked my first job for 86 to 98, 12 years. Then I went and became a consultant working for a boomer. Brilliant guy, but man, I couldn't do anything right. So it's like whatever I did and I brought it into him, that was crap. And I had to redo it. That didn't help my work ethic, because there's no point in doing anything until the crisis and you bring it to him, because he's going to tell you how to do it anyway. And then you got to scramble to get it done. Does that make any sense, Fred?
Yeah. I have some survivor guilt because I was the boss. In my early days of running the business, I was a nice guy. I was a nice boss up until I got frustrated, and then I'd get snappy. And I've learned not to do that. My current crew, I don't think would. I think they would tell you that I'm an okay guy, but they tell me that. But crews that I had from the 90s, no, not so much.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we all learn as we get older, so no problem there.
Well, and I don't. This isn't the purpose of this is not to be a bash the boomers session.
Why
Because
not? It's fun.
says the boomer in the room. Well, but I guess what I'm really trying to get at is we're trying to identify the cultural threads that brought us to where we are today. And yes, this has been a nice, slow, sedate stream. I actually like that. We're just slowly kicking ideas back and forth. But there were some interesting observations here. And speaking as a millennial, particularly one who is probably pretty counter to millennial culture, which I blame on my dad. But looking
That
into
was
it,
by design, by the way.
oh, I kind of figured that out in my late teens, early 20s that this was all by design.
I rebelled against the boomers before anybody else figured it out, because I started rebelling against them when I was 10. And I don't know why, because when you're 10, you don't know why. I just did. I was counterculture to the counterculture at the height of their messiness. I didn't like their riots.
Interesting. He didn't.
I'm in
like the
1969.
riots.
I'm watching their riots going, you guys are fools. I was watching moon landings. I thought that was cool.
Well, in my opinion, the moon landings are much cooler than riots. Much, much cooler. But I'm also an engineer too, so. So looking forward to today, people saying, well, but you're talking about these big time frames. Well, okay, so we actually have to put a pin in 2008 because 2008 was actually the first year that boomers started retiring in large numbers. Or it was either that or it was 2007, but it was right around the time of that crash. And as a result of that crash, and the Federal Reserve has tons of data on this. Our data, by the way, gets a lot better after in the mid 90s, roughly. And because the boomers had invested heavily in housing and what I call illiquid assets that were hit really hard, they had to go back to work. And as a result of that, so, your average boomer, they were thinking that I'll retire at 62, 63. They actually ended up working till they were 68, 69. And what that did is the Xers were just kind of like, yep, this has been every year of our lives ever since we entered the workforce. So they just kind of accepted it. But the Xers had enough experience that they didn't really get fired in large numbers. What actually ended up happening was the millennials who had just graduated college, had just gotten jobs in 03 to 07, were all fired en masse. And there's lots of demographics data on this. Guy named Peter Zion, who's an Xer, talks about this. And according to him, the millennials lost 5 years of experience that they will never get back on average. And they also lost 5 years of financial wealth building, for lack of a better term. And we've shown that chart before of the wealth distribution, and that's this generational impact is why that wealth distribution is so skewed. The millennials will never make it, and they know it.
Hey, guess what? That experience did not help the marriage situation or the baby making situation in those years.
No. No.
Because that was their young, fertile years where family formation happened. You're not going to form families if you just lost your job. Oh, have babies, I mean. Or even, that's going to be the start of the decline of marriage. And, one thing we have not yet touched on, when I got my job right out of college in 86, there were no female engineers. I mean, virtually none, maybe less than 1%. No, certainly none where I worked. The women had jobs as secretaries. Yes, we still had secretaries. Receptionists, oh, they were in the HR department. They were in the accounting department. There were a few women accountants. But men didn't, in a lot of areas, did not compete with women for jobs. You move forward, it was just a progression there through the 90s and 2000s. All the women came in, they weren't just working, they were now getting professional jobs. They were competing with the men for these jobs that
Terrible workplace environment.
up and coming men, well, to have a good salary, have a wife, form families, have kids. Yeah, now we got competition. That had a remarkable impact.
So Steve, there's a chart, and I'm looking for it, but it's made the rounds on the financial side of the world. And what this chart shows is average cost of living in the United States versus average per person income. And starting in the 80s somewhere, late 80s, average income kind of levels off and starts tracking inflation, but cost of living keeps going up. And I also remember in the 90s, DINKS. I don't know if you guys remember that acronym, D-I-N-K.
Oh, yeah.
Dual income, no kids for the young folks in the room. And DINKS, if you're dual income, because you have to be to survive and start, buying a house in order to qualify for a loan on a house, well, that means that your potential mom is now working.
Yeah.
Okay. And some places you could get healthcare or childcare, healthcare, some places offered that. Some places still do. I know Google still offers childcare, on-site childcare. Most places don't. So that meant that when I was working at Microsoft, they did not. And I was working literally back to back with he was a principal engineer, I believe, making a ton of money. His wife, also a principal engineer at Microsoft. These two probably pulled in $350,000. And I was asking about it, and he said, oh, yeah, basically all of her income goes towards the childcare and groceries. And my income has to cover the rest.
It's insane.
Well, he had to spend $10,000 a month, or no, it's $5,000 a month just on childcare. That was the childcare bill. It's $2,500 for his two kids per month. That's it. It was 5,000, and I remember this because he was complaining because it was going up to 6,000 that in next month, and he was complaining about it. So we've created a situation where the boomers had to keep working because of the financial crash that keeps the millennials out during their prime for fertility years. So they're not starting families. And it's interesting you brought this up, because if we look at the charts for demographics, guess when the birth rate starts really tailing off? Oh, yeah. About 15 years ago. What?
It's a coincidence, though.
Oh, it's a coincidence? I'm supposed to buy that's just a coincidence? I don't know, Steve. I don't know if I can get that.
Just because we have empower women and they come into their own does not mean society has to decline.
Well, we empowered women to go to work and they stopped having kids.
Go ask China.
The math ain't math.
Oh, there's other factors there too, but yeah, go ask China or Japan or
or South Korea or Germany. Germany is actually probably economically and culturally the closest to what the U.S. is doing. But Germany did the same thing. They did it 20 years earlier.
Man, next thing you're going to say is the highest purpose for women is to have children.
I would never say anything like that, Steve. I am a no, I can't say those words. I couldn't get them out. So I mean, we're an hour and a half in. We can wrap up now. This was just kind of, we
Okay.
achieved what I wanted to achieve, but
Let me make a general comment. We've been all over the map today and talking about history and how it brought us to where we are today. For people who don't think that history matters, I hope we proved you wrong. Okay, in order to understand how you are the way you are, you have to understand your parents and what drove them. You want to go one level deeper, understand the conditions your parents grew up in and how their parents affected them. We have this false idea that we're all individuals. We are not individuals. We are the product of our environment and our family. And that made you who you are. You are not an individual. You are affected by your environment and your family.
Steve, are you saying
That's
that
an abstract concept, but I believe it.
Steve, are you saying that no man is an island?
Essentially, yes.
No man can do it on his own.
That's right.
Well,
and you got to play the hand you're dealt.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Steve knows where I'm going with this series of streams, and this concept of no man is an island and no man can do it on their own is actually going to come up quite a bit over the next few streams that I'll be leading. But in this particular case, this is the history. This is kind of the what happened that brought us to the point that we have to have conversations that are pretty rugged. Like, no one wants to say stuff like how we have to say it. It doesn't feel nice, but we've left the era of feeling nice where we could, frankly, like the boomers, they had the luxury of being able to feel nice about themselves. Nick and I, we don't. So we're going to be a little rugged. That's I mean, if you guys watched our stream on Wednesday, Nick was on fire, and you're going to see more of that. But
it wasn't my generational knowledge. It was multiple generational knowledge.
Oh, how far back in history did we go for that?
Oh, creation. a lot of the 16th and 17th century, some 19th century. Yeah.
I think I even brought up Genesis because I do that a lot.
Yeah.
You do bring up
that
Genesis
goes back to in the beginning. So yeah.
But the purpose of the stream is to kind of set the field for where one of the directions that we're going to be headed next, and explain the historical backdrop of it, because you are a product of your parents. You are a product of your parents' environment. You're a product of the environment that your parents created for you. And it doesn't always have to be a good environment that they created. Your parents can, both individually and at a generational scale, have done a crap job. And it's okay to say that. Now, in my particular case, my parents did things very differently than the rest of their generation, and I think I turned out very differently for it. And I'm actually very grateful for it. But that's not the bulk of our generation. So that's all I have for this evening. On Wednesday, we're going to do Steve's reactions to the reactions, and possibly a call-in if there's any interest, if anybody wants to get up and bring their reactions to the reactions. Next Monday, I'm going to be leading what I'm calling the choice effect. we're going to get into we're going to dig a little bit deeper into this idea that the choices of who comes before and how they affect you, but also if the choices of the person who came before you affect you, what does that say about the choices you're making right now? I'm sure Nick has plenty to say on this subject. So that'll be next Monday, and we don't know what's up for Wednesday after next yet. But gentlemen, do you have any final thoughts, final words that you want to put in?
I'll say this. Look, you are the result of your generations that have descended, and you're reacting to that. But ultimately, you have to take responsibility to yourself, for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There you
go. Dad, you were saying something?
I was going to be more philosophical and say, it's not about you, and you are not your own.
I like that, because that applies both directions. I like that.
Yeah, I may or may not have said that to some folks before.
Consider your duties to the future and not just your rights today.
Yeah.
Consider your duties to the future. I like that, and not just your rights of the day. Oh, yeah. We're going to be talking about. Yeah, we're going to be talking about this a lot next week. So, well, you know what? It was fun chatting with you all. Nice to see you around, Dad. We'll get you back on in the future sometime when something comes up that you might feel like you can help us with.
Hey, this is fun. I enjoy this. I enjoy this type of stream.
And all right, we will see you all on Wednesday.
Bye.